Aloha and welcome. Welcome to Global Connections here on the ThinkTech Hawaii series. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and it's great to welcome all of you back. As you know, here on Global Connections, we bring interesting perspectives on a range of global issues. And today, we're joined by a special guest who's a young leader from Hawaii, basically grew up here, finished high school, and is now studying on the mainland. We're going to meet Julian Juarez. I have to say a little disclaimer because it happens to be my son, Julian, and yet it's a great opportunity to both get some insights, a youth perspective on some recent travel that he's done. Julian, I want to welcome you to Global Connections and thank you for joining us.
Oh, welcome. I'm
Aloha.
happy to be here.
Good to see you. And, one of the things maybe I'll just at the outset tell our listeners, you've just recently come back from some travels in Southeast Asia. We'll talk a little bit about that, some of your impressions, some reflections. But even earlier in the summer, you also did quite a bit of travel in Europe, a different part of the world, and try to look at some of the contrasts and comparisons. But let me begin by maybe if you can just say a word or two about yourself. I mean, you're here in Hawaii now, but in fact, you've been away for a few years, although this is where you grew up and finished your high school. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I go to Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, where I'm a senior now, and I took the semester off to travel a bit, and am now, back home after 6 weeks in Southeast Asia. I was able to build on different connections that I made my last semester, where I spent the time in Washington, D.C. And so it was nice to connect with people that I met in one part of the world, and then see them at home.
Yeah, that's right. And so again, maybe the other part you mentioned, last spring semester, you had an opportunity to take a break from Oregon to spend it in Washington, D.C. And at the university there, American University, like an exchange program, and also working on Capitol Hill in the Congress.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll weave in a little bit of that, but more, I think, for purposes of our show today, we're calling it youth culture, and really getting a perspective from a young leader like yourself who has been able to travel. I mean, it's this world that we live in now is, of course, more and more globally interconnected, and I think your case is just a good illustration of that. I mean, a generation ago when I was a college student, it wasn't as easy to move around the world and go to places. I mean, even Southeast Asia, you might visit a country or two, but you've just been able to come back from a whirlwind tour that took you to many. But as well, like you said, it's all about those connections, and many of them you made while you were in Washington, D.C., meeting people from different parts. And then it's very interesting when you're able to visit and see the world, but to see somebody somebody who welcomes you, who opens their house and otherwise shows you their world. And so maybe just, by beginning, tell us, actually part of what set up your context into Southeast Asia was this experience in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about what was it you did there, and what were some of the connections that you made?
Definitely. So I was studying sustainable development in Washington, D.C., taking a seminar class. And by chance in the class, Hadi Hamidang, he's a local CSO worker in southern Thailand.
From Thailand.
And he was doing an adult exchange program to D.C. And so we were able to hit it off. We built a pretty strong friendship, and he certainly pushed any opportunity.
Come visit,
come visit.
And his work is closely connected with the Asia Foundation, which is a large, non-governmental group working in many parts, but particularly in his case in Thailand.
In Thailand.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit again, maybe about that. You've met this guy, and here, developed a good friendship, and then suddenly he's inviting you to come visit and see the work that we do. Tell us what it was like, and maybe explain your little journey. You found yourself briefly coming back at the end of summer and making your way suddenly to Southeast Asia.
So I spent 6 weeks in Southeast Asia, kind of intending to maybe work or shadow Hadi in the Asia Foundation, but it turned into more of a sort of whirlwind experience with little homestays here and there. And I spent a lot of time in Indonesia, and a great bit of time in southern Thailand, where a lot of people don't know there's a conflict going on for many years now. There's been some serious tension between the government and military and the current coup, and a lot of insurgency groups.
Yes, and indeed, while you were there in Thailand not long ago, just barely a month ago, there was, of course, a very dramatic terror bomb that explodes, and here I happened to be at the time in Mexico, a little nervous, like, oh my gosh, where's Julian? Fortunately, the technologies we have today, within minutes, I was able to confirm that no, you're okay, you're safe in the south.
You actually brought the news to me.
That's right.
For a bit. I guess I hadn't been checking the news too often, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, all these people are connecting me. Are you okay? We know you're in Thailand, but fortunately, I was not in Bangkok at the time. But it definitely shifted my trip a bit, and I tried as much as I can to stay away from Bangkok, and ended up in Indonesia for 2 weeks.
Yeah. And I think, again, what are the things that is remarkable about both our ability to travel, to stay connected, to have news. Again, here I was in Mexico, texting you to say, hey, are you okay? And you didn't know, and I'm sending you reports on what happened just now minutes ago in Bangkok. This is the new world that we live in of this interconnectedness. And maybe just, again, a little bit more on this experience, because the work that you got to see there was wide-ranging, but a lot of on-the-ground sort of development. Describe a little bit, what are the kind of things that they do?
So I was able to attend a few events that were put on in the South, and one of them was the Haji Sulong event to commemorate the 61st year of his disappearance. And so the disappearance of Haji Sulong sparked a lot of Islamic nationalism in southern Thailand.
And this is a leader of this region in
This
southern
is a leader
Thailand?
of southern Thailand,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
he was a political activist, and I think Thailand was going through a bit of a transition and trying to understand how to accommodate the Muslim majority in the South. And I guess in the 50s, there was a bit of tension where Haji Sulong was asked to go to the police department, and he didn't return. He was doing a routine report to the department, and disappeared. And so this event that was put on at his residence, which is being restored now, and it was a great opportunity for local elites in Pattani province of southern Thailand to come together and meet with the family and have a panel discussion of what's going on in southern Thailand. So it was a moment to remember the past and what had happened, their history there, and then also to talk about more
the here and now,
and what's going on.
Yeah, very interesting. And of course, this area, like you mentioned, of southern Thailand is a Muslim majority, and it's had this tensions for some years now, a separatist movement, indeed very dangerous at times. Many people concerned about foreigners coming there. You were able to go and see it, and I wonder, maybe just tell us a little bit more. I mean, as you or maybe we'll step back from that, because after your experience in Washington in the spring, you had an opportunity to travel to the other side of the continent, which is into Europe. And it's a tradition that perhaps not enough people do. Other places like Australia and New Zealand are famous for having these long, journeys that young adults will go do. But you had a chance to travel, and most of it was for pleasure and visiting different places. But tell us a little bit about your summer experience. You traveled also in Europe to many countries, and any impressions that it left you with, because again, you went to a wide range of it. Tell us.
And growing up in Hawaii, everywhere I go, I represent Hawaii, so I introduce myself. I'm from Hawaii, and it's really nice to have that and be able to share that with different people as I meet on the travels.
It's a good icebreaker. I'm from Hawaii. All of a sudden, what are you doing here? Or,
exactly, and then they're like, whoa, you came a long way, and you kind of have to explain, well, yeah, definitely. Hawaii is very isolated. I had to take at least a 6-hour flight to get pretty much anywhere else. And our travels, I went to 13 countries in the region, and they were very quick. Every 2 days we're on a long train.
Quite a bit, yeah.
And so I made use of the very well-connected train network in Europe. And it gave me an opportunity to see a lot of the landscapes and hillsides, and moving through the Alps and then into different more farming regions.
And you started in Ireland first. You visited with some other friends that were studying there, and then made your way into Europe through continental Europe.
Yeah, and I guess a quick thing to say is that I went through Central and more Eastern Europe, and so I skipped out on
the far west.
Missed out on Spain.
So
and
the
France.
Netherlands, Germany, Austria, Italy, and then through what is Central and Eastern Europe.
Slovenia. Hungary.
And what are some quick takeaways, some impressions you were left with? Because like you said, you saw a lot of places, and there's a disadvantage to that. Sometimes you don't get the in-depth knowledge, but on the other hand, you're seeing very quickly a wide range of different cultures and people.
It was really nice to wake up in a new city every few days and have to change currency. So many of the countries are not part of the European Union.
Yeah,
and so
or the euro currency.
Or the euro.
That's right, yeah. Yeah,
and it was kind of interesting to have to think about how much am I spending here and how much am I spending there. And actually, in some places, it was a lot cheaper than others. And for the first time, they're kind of having to understand where your daily meals are a lot cheaper versus you get to Stockholm and you try to find anywhere to eat, you're going to be spending quite a bit.
And Northern Europe, in this case Scandinavia, much more expensive. But I wonder the other thought about this, and we'll speak as well to the case of Asia, but in Europe you've got this growing sort of interdependence of the countries through the European Union in particular, but even like yourself, young populations now that have a lot more mobility, students who are studying abroad in other places, who are traveling quite easily, and the borders are now fairly open once you're inside that zone. And I guess my question is this, I mean, can we speak of a growing sense of a European identity, especially among young populations? Do they see themselves as Europeans, or are they still Slovenians and Germans or whatever? What are your thoughts about these questions of identity?
Yeah, I think it's definitely generational, and the younger generation seems to have a bit more of a European identity, where I meet a German girl in Copenhagen, and she talks about how she's been living in Copenhagen for a few years now, and she has plans to go to Norway, and so and she's meeting all these different people in Copenhagen. She's not just meeting Danes; she's meeting other Germans, and so it definitely seems that as borders are definitely eased and people are able to move around, it seems that the identity is sort of shifting, where people definitely retain their sort of home country identity, but it's shifting and molding in a different way.
Yeah, a lot more blurred, and again, this sort of very fluid. And again, I think this is, like you described, it's a generational thing, because certainly the parents and grandparents of today's young populations, they lived within their countries in confined borders and clearly identities that were more fixed. This is all changing, and different ways of looking at that. Some people would see it very positive as just more open-mindedness, more adaptability, etc. And yet, I think I've seen evidence where there's often a pushback, because people don't want to lose what makes them distinct. They don't want to all be pushed into the same homogeneous mold.
And I think now we see a lot of those same ideas creating a lot of tensions for the refugee crisis right now in Europe.
Yes.
When I was in Sweden and explaining my travels, one of my hosts, we had a dinner at her house, and her mom was like, "Whoa, why are you going to all of these Eastern countries? I would never do a travel to there."
Poland, Hungary,
so
etc.
It was another thing to learn how recent these countries have kind of opened up.
That's right, yeah. And again, that region, like today you visited, I guess it was Hungary, Slovenia, Czech Republic, Poland. These are countries that, 30 years ago, people were not going in to visit in the same way. Now it's completely changed and much more open. So a very interesting observation there from this person. And I guess having seen that, and we're gonna try to contrast that, because as a young person yourself, I mean, you've come to realize there's a lot in common as you see other young people, whether it's popular culture like music or movies or dress or things like that. And I mean, what are some thoughts about that? I mean, things that bring together people no matter where they are, Europe, Asia, that are just common, or otherwise things that are clearly different that distinguish them from other places.
So I think for young people like myself, in college, a lot of the same sort of anxieties and feelings about, I have to get a job, or I need to do something with myself to, make mom feel okay. And a lot of people that I met would explain how, I have this long plan, I need to do this and this. And in the same way, I have the same sort of thought process where, I'm going to graduate soon and I need to start thinking ahead and what's going on and testing out, different industries and the job market. And so for that part, young people that are in college certainly have the same sort of anxieties, yet it is a little bit different. So in Sweden, school is free,
yes,
and the notion of paying for school is unheard of.
So the choices are not so much, what can I afford, but more, what's the right
Yeah.
fit, or how is this going to prepare me?
My friend that I met in Sweden, she was able to host us. She would talk about how her decision in school was, this is what I want to study, and this is what I like to study. And for me, making a decision for college, the financial factor was a big part of it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, that's a clear difference. And certainly in Europe, where for the most part education is provided as a public good, we don't see that in the U.S. We have to make tough decisions based on financial considerations. Well, we're going to continue our conversation in a moment. We're here joined today by Julian Juarez, a young locally based student. He finished his high school here in Hawaii 3.5 years ago now, and he's a college student up in Oregon, coming back to share some insights from recent travels and helping us understand what's it like as a young adult these days traveling around the world. We're going to come back with more on the story. Join us in just a few minutes.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia, and by Asia we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Aloha and welcome. Welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Global Connections Show. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. And today we're talking about some interesting topics related to youth culture, and as we'll see in a moment, social media, issues of identity, reflections from my guest today, Julian Juarez, who's a graduate here from Hawaii Punahou School 3.5 years ago now, and he's a college student up in Oregon who actually happens to be on break at the moment here in Hawaii, spending a couple of months. But more importantly, we're reflecting on some of your recent travels, Julian, and you originally we talked about some travels in the summer you did in Europe, having a chance to see various places. We have a few pictures. Maybe we can turn to one or two of them here just to see, and see if you can give us little comments. Actually, there I am with you as well. But tell us a little bit about this. Where was this?
So we are in Gubbio, Italy.
In central Italy.
Central Italy. And we had the very unique chance to witness this festival, the festival, the Cherry.
The Cherry Festival, a medieval festival.
Medieval festival, where they carry these candles throughout town. These teams of guys are just struggling for their whole lives, basically just holding on for dear life.
And what you don't see here, that little central plaza that we're looking at is suddenly crowded with about 10,000 people where you can't even move, and these guys are carrying these massive things through there, right? And it underscores, again, a place like Italy here, steeped in history and tradition, and its culture very much defined by that, and how important history is. And one thing that I wonder if you might reflect on that, I mean, in the U.S. especially, we're a fairly new country in the grand scheme of things, but especially, for us, anything from the 60s is old. When you're looking at here, it's from the 600s or the 1600s. What is your sense about, the power of history and how it's reflected when you're traveling in places? It could be Europe, it could be Asia. How does that?
There's a lot of pride.
Yeah.
And so I was certainly a foreigner to this place, and I got a lot of weird looks, like, what are you doing here? And it's very interesting to be able to witness this event that's been going on
forever, it seems. Yes, that's right. And let's see, maybe another picture. We have a few others on Europe. This is another one with you. I think this is probably in Ireland?
In Belfast.
In Belfast, Northern Ireland. A couple of your friends that you were visiting there, and their parents, actually Hawaii-based, another student there, Jake. And that was the initial arrival in first it was the Republic of Ireland, and then you traveled to Northern Ireland, which we all know is not the Republic of Ireland, but it's a part of the UK,
There was
right?
a quick currency change.
Yes,
and
to the British pounds, and even in those two, I mean, because they're all part of the same island, and they're all Irish people, but Northern Ireland is part of the UK. Did you see any clear differences, other than the currency, but any other feel for how it differed from the Ireland that you visited?
I wasn't able to pick up on too many differences. I think in Belfast we checked out the Peace Wall,
Okay.
and that was really interesting to learn more
Because here's
about.
a city that has a lot of history of its own
Irish
violence
history,
and having to overcome, the so-called troubles that they were called. But here again, just a chance for you to travel and see. And now we're moving on. This is another picture which was fascinating. I think tell us a little bit about this story. There you were in Scandinavia, I think in
We
Sweden.
found Bubby's ice cream in Stockholm in a grocery store.
Oh.
I'm with my friend here, Emma, who I met in Hawaii, and she was able to host us in Stockholm.
So there you are again. If this is not the global connection that we talk about here in the remote Stockholm, you can buy little mochi ice cream from Hawaii, Bubby's ice cream, in a supermarket.
And this was towards the end of my trip in June, and for most of the trip it had been quite hot, and I had dropped off my jacket with you, and didn't think I would ever need it again, but in June of all times in Stockholm, it was freezing.
It was very cold, and of course, and these are where they have the long days that the sun is up, but still, nevertheless, you have to be prepared, and you were not. So you showed up without a jacket and have to find a way. And I wonder, last thing, I mean, one of the things, maybe finishing about Europe, we'll turn to speak about your travels and travails in Asia in a moment. But one of the things about today's world and the technologies we live by are issues of social media and even getting around and using the internet. Again, travel today is so much easier. You can plan it, you can find information online quickly, and then you can keep in touch. You can keep people far away informed. I mean, what were some ways in which you used, for example, your own iPhone or whatever you had with you, and how does it work?
Well, Europe and Asia actually have budget airlines, and so it's very cheap, very fast to get around. Compared to the United States, where if I want to book a flight anywhere, we think that maybe $100 each way is cheap. No, I was paying maybe $30 for a flight, and I could book it the same day on an app that I would download.
Just a couple of clicks away.
Yeah, and there are 5 different budget airlines with different tiers to it, how much you want to pay, what you're looking for service-wise.
Yeah. So it's in many ways, countries, whether they be in Asia or Europe, other parts, they are able to leapfrog using these technologies to really help facilitate, movement, transportation, and essentially competition, so that you've got this growing. I never understand how they can stay in business and make money if they, their fares are so cheap, but they do it in different innovative ways. Often they charge you everything else. So if you want to bring a suitcase, you want to use a bathroom, you want a reserved seat, etc. What about in terms of just using, again, your smartphone? You've got, of course, on one hand, Wi-Fi access in many places, and in some places better than others. Any quick thoughts on how that plays out? And
I was constantly downloading maps of cities, so instead of carrying around maps, the phone became the map.
Yes.
And so that was really accessible and easy to use. I could star different places, or where the hostel was, or what do we want to see for the day.
Yeah, no, this is a different type of travel. I mean, I myself, have been a world traveler many, many years, and it's changed really how you do things, how you could take control of your own destiny in a different way, where in the past you actually had a travel agent. I don't know if any of us even know travel agents anymore that, buy our goods. Instead, you have this capacity now through smartphones to do it all. And I wonder, maybe just on that note itself, I mean, did you see interesting differences of different places where somehow people are more connected or more obsessed with it, and maybe as we turn to your experiences from Asia, I mean, one of the remarkable things, especially in a lot of developing countries, is how something as simple as a phone has really changed.
Revolutionized.
Tell us some reflections on how you saw that and examples.
So phones are very cheap in Asia. My friend picked one out for maybe $5. And I ended up using the same phone for most of my trip. I had an Indonesian phone, which I paid maybe $3 for the SIM card. I just put it in the same BlackBerry. And everyone's got a phone. Everyone has.
And the cost is just obviously so low.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about the $1,000 model, but just a real simple,
No,
basic
just a
model.
simple, basic.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
text, call, and then also smartphones and tablets are making a huge entry into the household. So everyone's got, or almost every household has a tablet, and everyone's fighting over who has the most tablet time. And,
Yeah.
and I guess with Wi-Fi and access to YouTube, so many places that I went to, instead of a TV, you have young children that are watching their cartoons on YouTube.
YouTube, yeah.
And sometimes it's not always in English. It's a lot of times it's in Thai or Bahasa, and kids are just glued to their tablets.
Yeah, it's amazing, and in some ways, the low cost and availability, in a sense, it has kind of democratized. It has made available to everybody this simple technology. I know in some of the work I've seen, it's interesting how something as simple as a cell phone has revolutionized the economy in places where now the farmer can suddenly get information on pricing of their goods or finding out what the market needs are, things that have just really radically changed even again the simplest economic task.
I mean, communication and certainly changing lives around the world. My experience is more with I guess the tourist industry there, and even there you walk around and everything's kind of set up for you. And why is that? Because people are connected in their phones. They're calling. I was able to connect with a local motorbike driver in Bali who I could call, and he would pick me up, and we would bargain or for the fee, and then he would come pick me up. I don't need to arrange with the hostel anymore. I don't need to arrange.
Yeah, you kind of become your own, boss, or you've got this freedom of choice, and it's remarkable because even you described like this bike. I mean, it's even the advent of something like Uber, your own private driver, a couple of clicks away, and they're there in minutes. You don't even have to have any money transacting, and this is really changing how we travel, how we see the world. And I have to imagine too, just again, a generational thing. Now that people who grow up and have these, they just assume that's how it always was. It wasn't the way even 10 years ago we did things. It's really remarkable how that's changing. And I mean, I guess I'm curious. I mean, is it on one hand it's creating like a convergence? Everybody is experiencing the same thing, and it kind of breaks down barriers. And what does that mean? I guess in terms of identity, in terms of just access to wider markets, wider people.
So I think it certainly speaks to a lot of economic mobility and increased opportunity that's available with all of the extra access to communication. Certainly, this motorbike driver, he's happy to pick up a personal fee. He doesn't have to arrange with any company or anything. It's just
you become your own entrepreneur,
him, and he eliminates the Minuteman. He's not paid by wage. He's paid by how many rides he can pick up. And I remember, speaking to him, and he explained that at some point he was working in the tour industry as a front desk or managing the front office of a guest house, and he explained once he saved up enough money for a motorbike, that was it.
It
so much more
life.
freedom.
Yeah.
He's got his phone, he's got his contacts, and he's ready to usher tourists around to different sites.
It's amazing because it actually, what it does is it fosters a certain entrepreneurial zeal. Like you can take your own risk, do your own thing. You don't have to work for somebody else. And I mean, not everybody is going to be as excited about that, but certainly for those who have the initiative to drive, it means suddenly more freedom to carry that out. Well, we're having a great conversation here with Julian Juarez, my guest. Julian has come back recently. We're going to continue in just a moment with a little more. He's traveled this summer into many parts of Europe, all around, and most recently he returned from a large travel of 6 weeks throughout Southeast Asia. As we come back for the final segment of our show, we'll talk a little bit more about that experience, look at some other pictures, and get a perspective from our young leader here who's with us today, Julian Juarez. Come back and join us for more on the story in just a moment.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
And that's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech. Is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't
yeah.
you guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Aloha, welcome. We're back and we're live, and I'm Carlos Juarez, your host here on Global Connections, and today we're having a conversation with Julian Juarez. Happens to be my son, just by coincidence, but he is, of course, a Hawaii-based, graduate of high school here in Hawaii, and he's moved on to his college studies in Oregon. But part of that has also taken him. He had a semester in Washington D.C. that helped open some new connections for him, which in turn both took him for some travels into Europe in the summer, and now more recently Southeast Asia. And again, this is a new world, Julian. I mean, I myself been a traveler all my life. Some of it was defined more by my own father's work that took us all over. But today, it's remarkable how you're a testament to both the ease and ability for people to move across borders very seamlessly, and it's a generational thing. You have now technologies and tools that are at your disposal. And I wonder, first, if you might just say a few words about thinking back about your own education, high school and college now, what are the kind of things that have helped prepare you either to, think about seeing the world? Because on one level you've been learning about it, but there's no substitute to actually going out and seeing the world, getting out of your routine or your comfort zone. Tell us a little bit about, again, how you've either been inspired or otherwise prepared, to go out and see the world as you've done.
Yeah, so of course I've taken different history classes of the world and whatnot, and it really isn't until you go out and are able to travel that you can start either making more loose connections or make more serious connections. Where I studied Italy for a bit, or in Europe, and you don't really touch on how young of a country Italy is and how identities themselves are very regional. Mm-hmm. I think if you're Italian, you're just gonna.
They're all the same.
Yeah,
somehow,
you're gonna
right?
have a pride for all of just Italy, and it's not the case.
Not quite. If you're from Milan, you don't like the people from Rome, or even less the people from the south. So this notion of being able to see the country, you learn a deeper level of insight into it, right? And maybe again beyond that, about your own experiences. Was there anything that somehow inspired you to want to see the world more, or was it studying it or meeting other people? Because on the one hand, we talk about you build connections by going to the world and seeing it. That's but it's not always feasible, not easy for everybody. No. On the other hand, the world, you don't have to go. It comes to you. Whether you're in Honolulu, whether you're in any other urban area, or even frankly rural areas today, people of the world are moving to places where they hadn't been. So the world is there. But again, I would just go back. There's no substitute to actually seeing the world and going out there and experiencing it. And if you had to say, what are the kind of skills and competencies and maybe things that prepare you best for that? Because it can be a shock anywhere you go, and it will be.
Yeah.
What are some thoughts
So
about?
I definitely had some, anxieties before traveling. I was going to be alone for a while, and it was important to, try to make some connections. But going into it, you don't really know exactly I didn't know what my itinerary was going to be. But what I learned very quickly was a lot of the cultural competencies that are learned growing up in Hawaii, different experiences with Asian cultures, really made the experience a lot more streamlined for me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to each country or having another experience and being shocked by it.
Mm-hmm.
There was a level of familiarity to, obviously eating Thai food. We're able to have a wide range of different foods here in Hawaii or any big city that you go to.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's fair to say, actually, growing up in Hawaii in many ways prepares you, because we deal with a lot of cultures here. We have, especially Asia, it's right here in our immediate environment. And so it's not a shock to go to Thailand and suddenly eat Thai food, because you've had it here and you've met other, parts of Asian culture, for example.
And yet, the language barrier is definitely a big deal. I would be sitting with my, kind of hosts, and they'd be jumping into a very, heated Thai conversation, and I'm not able to engage as often.
Yeah.
But again, English is everywhere. I think I learned that the world is definitely catering towards English speakers.
Yeah, it is, of course, the lingua franca, and especially even there, in many ways, a generational thing. Younger populations tend to be more, more skilled at English speaking than their grandparents or their parents. And that makes a big difference. On one hand, for younger populations, it means that you can meet other people and they're likely to know some English, and they're likely to share some common interest in music or whatever it might be.
I mean, one of my homestays turned into me hanging out in Malang, Indonesia, with a bunch of Southern Thais who wanted me there to practice their English. And so I had a few days before I needed to move on, and I decided to kind of just hang out with them and experience the slow life. Southern people from Southern Thailand like to express that they have this, we do the slow life here. It's not like Bangkok where it's all
They're
busy.
kind of like the Hawaiians of Thailand, very relaxed and a little slower pace.
And so I was able to connect with that, and they were surprised at first, like, "Whoa, like, you understand this a bit?" And I was,
Yeah. Very interesting. Now, let's turn for a moment now, as you come back recently from Southeast Asia. We have a couple of pictures. We can take a look here at a few and maybe tell us what you have here.
This is in Vientiane, in
This
Laos.
is in Laos, okay.
These are some Korean tourists that are on their phones, taking a bunch of selfies everywhere.
Yeah. And then here again.
This is in Prambanan in Indonesia, in Yogyakarta.
Okay, yeah. And visiting some site of some ruins.
It's a Hindu temple.
Hindu temple, yeah. Okay, and then let's see, here you are.
This is with Michael in Cambodia and Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat, of course, a infamous place. And as you visit these places, I mean, what do you come away from? I mean, these are they're frozen in time on one hand, and they obviously reflect the grandeur of a past. And yet today, these are countries that are on one hand becoming modern and entering the the sort of the global economy, but nevertheless preserving this. I mean, what were some feelings you had as you visited a grandiose place like this?
So on the first hand, I guess it's very interesting to be somewhere where in growing up in Hawaii, we don't learn too much about Southeast Asian history and the longer empires that were there.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was the first time to pick up on that. And when you think about it, it's very incredible to have these temples that are still in place today.
Centuries and centuries have gone by, right?
Yeah. And just to see the power that was held by this empire to command the amount of labor to build something like this.
Because these are
incredible.
These are pretty advanced civilizations for what they were able to do. And I think the other remarkable thing is today we may think of a country like Cambodia, and our memory is usually, well, they've had a crisis. There's been a big civil war in the 70s and all this. But the reality is that this is a culture with a very rich heritage and a past, and so people obviously take pride in that, and it is part of their identity. And until you can see that and appreciate it, you might not think the same about them. And so no substitute to going there. Let's see, we have a few more pictures. Tell us, this is an interesting one.
In a cave. So we were in Laos and we went caving, and there's a temple in the cave of the Buddha.
Interesting. So tucked away in the middle of this remote cave, this is in Laos as well?
Yeah.
Okay, you've got this Buddhist temple.
It shows the sort of prominence of religion in the region.
Yeah, how powerful. And a certain serenity that it also presents, because you've got this place that's, gosh, I mean, just seems completely in the middle of nowhere, like some, hidden place, and here it is, a place to worship. One final slide, we've got, I think, a final picture here from your travels, and this is a little dusty road. Where is this?
This is in Cambodia. This is Ta Prohm, where Tomb Raider was filmed.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
It's famous for these temples that have just been kind of overrun with trees.
The trees
that
have grown
growing
over them
right
all,
into
so it looks
them.
really exotic, like obviously frozen in time, but then the earth has begun to take them over again.
Yeah. But another thing to note from these more touristy travels is that the industry is so strong. It's so easy to be a tourist, to visit all these temples, and it's not just Western tourists. A lot of Indonesians are on the move.
That's
with
right.
access to cheap bus transportation, air transportation. And so it's actually swelled the industry.
Interesting. And of course, I mean, on one hand, that also places a real constraint because what you have in these countries, Indonesia or Thailand, large middle classes, people who are now, having more, ability to travel, and so, like you described, they're not just European tourists. You've got tourists from other Asian countries, even their own countries. But this puts a real constraint on, and much like we have here in Hawaii, tourism is a very, #1 industry, but you have to look carefully at how you manage that so that it doesn't both, ruin the environment or otherwise even, cheapen the image of what you're trying to promote, because you have to ensure that it's, it's real, it's not, again, not making it something artificial.
I think that's definitely a crisis and struggle that's going on now. With, the tourism is not going to stop, and yet it's very profit driven, and so it's hard to stop and take the time to think about how do we make this more sustainable, how do we make this more efficient, and there are definitely some challenges with it.
No, absolutely, because there's a lot, like you said, a lot of it's driven by, obviously there's the money factor, but the other is the need to both preserve the integrity and to really make sure people are appreciating the culture and not just there to kind of take advantage of cheap whatever it might be. Now, here as we finish our conversation, I want to, certainly thank you for sharing some thoughts and reflections about this. I mean, I wonder as you think about, experiences like what you've done traveling, what you take away from it, because you're finishing your last year, you still have to go back and finish the semester there. And how does this type of travel, this experience of seeing the world, how does it help inform you, for your next steps? You go back into the classroom and suddenly you have to write some more papers, do some more research, et cetera, but you come with a sort of now this knowledge and sort of this data that's tucked away from your experience, and how do you reflect on that?
So all of this travel, it makes me feel very small. And so, time spent in Salem, Oregon, it turns into, I have a little bit more motivation to go out and get the work done because there's still so much more out in the world.
That's right, and it's a big world, and even though you've seen some places, in a few cases there were just very small, short visits, as you can imagine, there are places you want to go back to and maybe spend more time or get to know a little better.
Yeah, and it's not just the sort of geographical wealth of the world, it's also just people, the cultures, the different shiftings of, as we talked about, generational identity shifts, and so there's so much, you can be anywhere and learn.
Well, I want to thank you, Julian, for this opportunity to join us here and our listeners on Global Connections, part of the ThinkTech Hawaii series here. We've had a great conversation today, joined by Julian. Julian has come back from some recent travels and in many ways reflects, again, our youth today who have much more options and opportunities, technologies, and really connections that you might meet people somewhere now, you can actually visit them as you have done. And so I hope, especially for any of our younger listeners, you can get inspired as well, find a way to get out of your comfort zone. No substitute to going and seeing the world and having these become life transformational experiences.
Yeah, I will always be connected to these places in a very unique way. There's always a piqued interest in Southeast Asian affairs or European affairs now.
Excellent. No, well, very, very well put. And so thank you, our listeners, for joining us here on Global Connections. We try to bring you insights and perspectives from different places. Today from a young leader who's come out of Hawaii and has now come back to share some of his reflections on the world. Thank you for joining us here on Global Connections, and stay tuned for our upcoming shows. Aloha.